Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's special screening and analysis of The Hours. This event is organized by Prague Writers Film Festival and Cinergy. Cinergy is a platform bringing filmmakers to Prague for masterclasses and debates. And Prague Writers Festival is bringing marvelous writers to Prague. And one of them is among us tonight. So please, warm welcome for Michael Cunningham. Have a seat. This screening will be special in many ways, not because of Michael's presence only, but because of the fact that we will break the screenings, we will do several pauses, and we will comment on various aspects of the film. But it's obvious to start with Mrs. Dalloway and your relationship with this novel and with Virginia Woolf and how it all happened, how it all started.
Well, can you hear me? Okay. I was 15 years old in Southern California, grew up in Los Angeles, and short version, I was trying to impress a girl who was much smarter than I was. And I thought, if I read Virginia Woolf, maybe she'll go out with me. It didn't work. Or rather, it worked in a way I didn't expect it to, because although it didn't help me with this girl at all, when I read Mrs. Dalloway, which I really just picked at random, Virginia Woolf, here's one, I had never read language like that before. I had not known it was possible to produce that much liveliness with ink and paper and the words in the dictionary. Just the basic tools that are available to everybody. I remember thinking, when I was 15, oh, she was doing with language something like what Jimi Hendrix does with a guitar. There's a small body of us who insist on the parallels between Virginia Woolf and Jimi Hendrix. And it made me into a reader. I had not really thought much about books until then, and it changed me in some fundamental way. I'm sure many of us here have a first book like that. It's a little like a first kiss. It's the book, maybe it was a book you read as a child, but it's the book that cracks open literature for you, that first gives you to understand what words on paper can do, and that was Mrs. Dalloway for me. And many years later, I wrote this book, which is a tribute to Mrs. Dalloway, which is a book about reading a book. And frankly, I never imagined any of this would happen. It was supposed to be this arty little book that would sell a few hundred copies and vanish. I didn't expect this. And it's fantastic, it's amazing. It's still amazing to me after all these years.
And then you started to read other modernists, but Virginia Woolf, because of these reasons you just mentioned, remained the most important one of them, right?
You always remember your first, right? Yeah, she was my first. You know, James Joyce was all well and good, but I was Virginia's already.
And then you read many other books on Virginia Woolf, especially biographies, also like studies on like sexuality and shaping of modernist literature, and there you started the other stories in the book. That are around Mrs. Dalloway, right?
Yeah. Originally, the book was just going to be a contemporary retelling of Mrs. Dalloway? What if that character in the Woolf novel were alive today, if she had the kind of choices that women have now? Because when Mrs. Dalloway lived in the 20s, there really wasn't, you could be a teacher, a nurse, or a wife. Not that we're done with women's rights, but you know, it's anyway. Blah blah blah. I told you, I asked you not to let me blab on, and I'm going to hold you to that. I came to realize that we don't need another version of Mrs. Dalloway. We've already got Mrs. Dalloway. We've already got a great novel. We don't need me to do a modern version of it. And I thought, oh, well, that one didn't work out. But then I thought, oh. And I added the character of Virginia Woolf, thinking, what if this was about the character she created and the author herself when she first began to create the character? And it still wasn't working. It still felt sort of academic and like a conceit. And again, I was going to give it up. I thought, this is just not working. This is an idea for a book and not a real book. And I was sitting at my desk about to throw this one out and start another novel. And I had this image of Clarissa Dalloway and Virginia Woolf and my mother. And I thought, Mom, what are you doing in my hallucination? And I thought about it, and I realized that my mother, who is very much the character played by Julianne Moore in the movie we're about to see, I think like a lot of women at the time, some women still today, she was too big for her job, wife and mother. She should have done something more in the world, and it wasn't enough for her. But rather than get a job, she became obsessed with perfection in the house. Everything had to be perfect all the time. She did, spoiler alert, she would bake a cake and it wouldn't turn out well enough, and she would throw it away and bake another cake. And what I started to think about was that if you take Virginia Woolf, a great artist, and my mother, a wife and mother in Pasadena, California, and remove the end result. One woman creates enduring works of art, the other woman is trying to create a cake so perfect it will banish sorrow. If you take those things away and just look at these two women's desire to transcend what's possible, if you look at their desire to create something magical and perfect, and Virginia Woolf was always disappointed in her novel, just as my mother was always disappointed in her cakes. I thought, okay, Mom, you get equal billing with Virginia Woolf just for wanting so much to create something fabulous. And then the book came together.
And the book had tremendous success, including Pulitzer Prize, Ben Faulkner Prize, and more. And then a call came, like, who was the one who called you, we want to do a film out of this book?
I got a call from a producer named Scott Rudin, who had picked up the book in an airport. And he called me up and said, could I option the book for a movie? And I was slightly surprised to hear myself say, well, I don't know. I don't see it as a movie, and I'd really, honestly, rather that it not be made into a movie at all than be made into a bad movie. And, Scott was upset about that. You don't really say no to Scott Rudin. No one has ever said no to Scott Rudin about anything. What if I got a really great writer to do the adaptation? I said, well, maybe. And he called the next day and said, what if the adaptation was written by David Hare, brilliant English playwright? And then I said, sure. if somebody as gifted as David Hare thinks he can make a movie out of this book, go ahead. We'll see what happens.
So let's see what happened.
And this is what happened.
And we will be back after like 12 minutes into the movie, and we will do more comments on specific topics and specific topics in the movie. So, thank you for now.
Thank you.
So we have seen the opening of the film. The first sequence is very truthful to the book. We see what happens in the first chapter. But then first major shift comes, because David Hare did something with your book, with those parallel stories, and managed to create with his team one time and one space for all those three characters, for the writer, the character, and the reader. Were you satisfied with it at that time he was proposing it?
Yes. I may be the only living writer who's actually happy with the movie made from his book. And I don't have the idea that some writers do, that the book is some kind of precious text. It's never, even when you write it, it's not the book you had in mind. It's interesting. One of the things I've learned from working with translators who agonize over how true to be to the source language, how much license to take, I always encourage them to take as much license as they need. And I've come to understand that the original is already a sort of inaccurate translation of the better book you meant to write. So it's all translation. And that made it perfectly natural for me to say to the utterly brilliant David Hare, make this yours. I'm happy to help if you need any help, but I want to see the David Hare version of the story, not the filmed version of my own story.
And we have seen all those three protagonists, huge stars, Nicole Kidman, Meryl Streep, and Julianne Moore. But you were not involved in the casting process, but you were very close to preparing the film, and also you were on the set several times, right?
Yes, I was quite a bit. I mean, it is their movie. It's David Hare's movie. It's not my movie, but they were very generous about having me around and letting me watch. David and I had one fight, but we can get to that later. We're not at that point in the movie yet. But yeah, and of course the big risk that they decided to take was putting that prosthetic nose on Nicole Kidman. I'm sure you can imagine there were a lot of doubts about that. But she was having trouble getting into the role. This was long enough ago that Nicole Kidman was not considered a serious actor. She was kind of a starlet, like she'd been in a Batman movie. And she was really, this is no secret, I would say it to Nicole just as surely as I say it to all of you. She was the big box office attraction. And nobody thought Nicole could actually pull it off. And she was having difficulty. She knew why she was there. She knew she was there for her star power and not because anyone really believed in her ability to act. And Stephen Daldry, the director, slapped his nose on her. She said, "What if you looked more like her? What if you were released from your own movie star beauty?" And she said, "Okay, sure, let's try it." It was just for rehearsals, but then they thought, well, maybe we'll just film her in it. And I was there in London when they did Nicole's first scenes, and there was this moment watching the dailies, what they've shot that day, sitting with Scott and David and other people, and we saw Nicole's first scene. I thought, oh my God, is she going to pull this off? Is she going to actually do it? And she did. And it felt like a true miracle.
There were 9 Academy Award nominations for the film, but only this one for Nicole Kidman, for the main actress, was actually awarded. So she deserved it, according to you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, Nicole got her Oscar. Prizes are such funny things. This movie came out the same year as a movie called Chicago, a big musical with singing and dancing. And the minute it came out, I thought, we are so lost. We are so not getting any Oscars. Right again.
There is a line in Mrs. Dalloway that says, "Oh, if she could have had her life over again." That might be one of the keys, not only for the book, but also for the film, right? Like having some life over again in different time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's still kind of remarkable for me to see what happened with the book. I don't know if I should tell you this story, but I will. My mother died while they were filming the movie. As I said, the Julianne Moore character is very closely based on my mother, and she was diagnosed with cancer as they were filming, and I called Scott Rudin, and I was in California with my family, and I said, "Scott, I have a feeling my mother may not get to see the movie. Is there anything you could do?" And he had they'd already shot about half of it. He had some scenes on film sent to my parents' house in Pasadena. And I found myself sitting on the sofa we'd had since I was 15 and reading Mrs. Dalloway for the first time with my mother, who would, as it turned out, die in about another 3 weeks, watching Julianne Moore play her as if she was already being reincarnated while she was still alive. That was another miracle in its own way.
We can see you in the movie in the next few minutes. I wanted to point this out because it's only like 2 seconds or something like that. The character is called Man in the Street or Man in Front of the Shop. So get ready for these 2 seconds when Meryl Streep's character walks out for the flowers, as you have already noticed in the film. She's passing a man who is Michael Cunningham himself, right?
And I have to tell you, I had a bigger part, and I was cut. Here was my part. I walk up to you see me walking eagerly. If you blink, you miss it. But I'm about to deliver my line. I'm about to run into Meryl on the street. We embrace. We do a graceful little half turn. She says, "Are you coming to my party?" And I say, "I am." I wouldn't miss it. That was my part, and I got cut. It's the movies. It's fabulous and it's heartbreaking.
But you are smiling while walking on the street. We can notice from the...
Because I think I'm about to have a scene with Meryl Streep. I'm not thinking cutting room floor. I'm thinking this is the start of my movie career.
So we will proceed with the film and get ready. This moment will last only like 2 seconds, and it will come in like 3 minutes into the movie from now. And we will come back later again. This was a very strong scene, and this scene allows us to speak about some sexual identity of your characters in the film. What would you say about their sexual identity?
What I would say about their sexual identity is that none of these three women could be accurately described as straight or gay. I feel like one of the jobs of any writer is to insist that things are even more complicated than they appear to be. And that very much includes sexuality. My sense of what just happened between Laura and Kitty is, it was about connection. You know, it was about, I don't think it was without a certain desire, but it's not that Laura is a repressed lesbian living a life of lies. It's not that simple. It was a moment. And Kitty erased it, and it's gone.
Kitty opened up for some moment to her, and that was the only moment they could connect.
Yeah. You know, same with Clarissa, Meryl's character. She is in love with Richard, but she's also in love with her girlfriend, Sally. There's a kiss in every plot line. There's a whopper coming up. In Mrs. Dalloway, the original novel, Clarissa, when she was young, had a woman friend, another girl, and they kissed once. That was it. And then they got married and lived their entire lives without ever kissing another woman. But in her 50s, Mrs. Dalloway, in the novel, feels, again, not like, oh, if only I'd pursued my true nature as a lesbian, but more, that was the moment of profoundest connection I've ever felt with another human being. I guess you could say I was less concerned with people's sexual identity than I was with their desire to connect.
Yeah, I would maybe dare to say that the sexuality kind of like follows the love or the moments of this like connection. So it changes throughout the life. It appears in various moments like this one we have just seen. So if there is love, then sexuality comes after. So that's why it's so fluid.
Yes. It's about love. The sex is sort of secondary. In this story, I don't mean sex is always secondary by any means. I would never say that. But but in this particular story, it's about a kiss. It's about flowers. It's about people's desire to find a way to live with each other intimately without destroying each other in the process.
A fun fact for this scene is that the small boy didn't want to act together with Julianne Moore. And you were on the set during this during this filming. So
yes, it is a bit of a fun fact. Jack is actually was six. Now he's much older now. They talked to hundreds of children, and Jack was cast. He'd never acted before. And as it turned out, his mother hadn't mentioned this until it was time to start shooting. Jack's father had died relatively recently, and when he was introduced to Julianne, who would play his mother, he thought, no, I have a mother and it's not you. So, as you could see, they got through the first few scenes together in the same room. Jack is just hating Julianne, and Julianne is trying to work with that. She said, "Oh, okay, you little asshole, then hate me, and we'll try to make that work." And I think really from about this point on, Jack put his tiny little foot down, and all the rest of the scenes, as I recall, maybe one or two exceptions, are shot separately. Julianne went back home to New York. They shot Jack's scenes, and then Julianne came back to Florida, where her scenes were shot, and they did her scenes, and they spliced them together, and it looks like they're in the car at the same time. It looks like they're in the room at the same time. They are not. Jack, after a few days, said, "Nuh-uh. No, you're not my mother, and I'm not going to act with you anymore." No one was as difficult as Jack. Only the 6-year-old was a diva.
And was there something specific that actors or actresses brought to those scenes you have imagined and written in the book? Especially this scene followed pretty closely what is in the book. But is there something that was added by one of the actresses or actors?
Oh, yeah. People talk about how, aren't you worried that they're going to mess up your book when they make it into a movie? And, well, I've said, not really, not that much for me. But it is difficult to take a written story and turn it into a movie. You don't have people's interiors. You don't have the access to people's inner lives that you have with a novel. But coming up, Meryl has a scene with Jeff Daniels, minor spoiler alert, and she's trying to hold it together and trying to have this party and trying to be okay, and she's in the kitchen talking to the character played by Jeff Daniels, and she loses her balance for a minute. She's just like, whoa, and Meryl just did that, all on her own, and you can't write that. It would seem too obvious. And so there's something lost when you turn a book into a movie, but there's so much gained too. There is Meryl Streep just stumbling for a second, and that's it. And she's gone, and it's gone. But wow, it was the most remarkable thing watching these people work. Meryl does no preparation, by the way. No, well, no. I mean, she rehearses, but no. Between takes, she's like having a cigarette, saying, "Yeah, no, New York is just no fun anymore." And then she gets up and does this. She's not in her trailer getting into character. She's like some sort of Olympic athlete who can just do this. It's a mystery.
Okay, let's go on with the movie.
Great.
And we will come back later. This is the moment in the film, or in the screenplay, the earlier version of the screenplay, where there was the argument you mentioned. Because she wasn't supposed to be killing herself with pills. It was supposed to be different. So what was the argument about?
It was the only argument I had with David Hare. In the script that he wrote, she reaches into the closet and takes out a gun. And I said, David, about the gun. First, they wouldn't have a gun. And second, she wouldn't do that. She wouldn't want to be found that way. She almost literally wouldn't want to leave that kind of mess. And David said, well, yes, there's this sort of cliche that women, if they take their own lives, do it with drugs, and only men blow their brains out, and I want to upset the stereotype. And as I listened to him, I thought, no, David Hare, English person, you just think all Americans are carrying guns, don't you? And I bet you think if this argument goes on much longer, I'm going to take out my gun and shoot you. It just felt so wrong. And I've talked to Stephen Daldry, the director, also an English person, who said, no, the gun is more dramatic, the gun is more interesting. And so I called Julianne Moore. And I said, what do you think about the thing with the gun? And she said, I hate it. I was going to try to make it work, but if I know that you, the guy who wrote the original story, don't like it, I'm going to say I just can't play it. I'm just going to say I can't make this convincing. And I think the moral of the story is obvious. If you're losing an argument, just call up a movie star.
And it's also, because of the water, probably the most surreal moment of the whole film, right?
Well, it's funny, when you've seen a rough cut of a movie, you're aware of all the things that aren't in it anymore. That was one of a half dozen moments in which the movie becomes sort of hallucinatory, and Stephen, the director, said, you know what, I think just the one. And I was against it. I thought, no, for symmetry's sake, there have to be more than one of these sort of impossible, surreal moments. But he was right. It really stands out, just the one. Spoiler alert, there's no more rooms filled with water, no roses burst into flame. Those were filmed. As was a scene on a beach with three 20-year-olds playing Meryl Streep and Lewis and Richard. Those poor kids. They wore bathing suits in the winter and shot a scene on a beach in Cape Cod, and like me, they ended up on the cutting room floor. I mean, it's just there's this movie, and there's the kind of ghost of this movie. It's like this, but not exactly.
One of the minor shifts of the screenplay that differs the screenplay from your book is that Laura's relationship is different. In the book, she's told to be married for a really handsome guy who was even described a bit like a prince, and she was always the reader, the dreamer in the high school probably, and she married this guy probably every woman around her wanted. And John C. Reilly is a bit different type of character, right?
I think John C. Reilly is gorgeous. But yes, this is a different story. John's part was going to be played by Billy Crudup, and actually, Julianne's part was going to be Gwyneth Paltrow, who is quite attractive, but can sort of bring it down in a way that Julianne just can't. Julianne is just so beautiful. She can't. There's nothing you can do to make her unbeautiful. And Gwyneth was going to be able to kind of fake looking like most people. And then Billy couldn't do it, and Gwyneth couldn't do it, and so and this is fantastic. But yeah, in my version of the story, which I think would have been implied by the gorgeousness of Billy Crudup and Gwyneth Paltrow sort of playing homely. Yes, as you say, this particular story is the one about the prince who marries the ugly duckling. He is he's a football hero. He's a war hero. She's a quiet, mousy thing who reads, and he, in theory, by falling in love with this substantial, if slightly peculiar girl, breaks out of his own stereotype, doesn't marry the blonde cheerleader, takes her to live in the castle, and as it turns out, it's the worst thing he could have done for her. As it turns out, she can't live in a castle. That fairy tale.
Julianne Moore had played a similar role set in the 50s, a melodrama in Todd Haynes' film Far From Heaven. Have you seen this film?
Yeah, yes I have, yeah.
Do you see those similarities? Or
oh yeah. But Julianne can do anything. It's really interesting to watch actors work. Meryl, like I said, doesn't stay in character between takes. Julianne is kind of superstitious about her own incredible gift. So she's not difficult. She'll do as many takes as you want, but no rehearsal, no talk with the director between takes about how the character is playing. You do not speak to her about what she's doing, ever. She just does it. And she does it really well. And of course, I just have to say one more time, Nicole, my God, she was just a starlet. She was just, she was just an action movie heroine. And look at her. Look what she pulled up. No one thought she could do that.
And one more topic is suicide. There seem to be no God in the lives of your characters, in the book and in the film, both. Life or death ends life definitely. So it's a world without God?
It's people without God. Yeah, these people are secular. How to put this? Obviously, it's a funny little story about people killing themselves, and somehow the idea of complete termination felt more right for these people and this story than the idea of heavenly reward. That what they were contemplating was really checking out, and what they were feeling was that their lives were so unbearable that they'd rather just be gone. No harps, no angels, no clouds for these people.
Okay, thank you. And we will be back once more.
Thank you all for
And
listening.
now we will go on with the screening. Well, after the scene, what do we know about Virginia Woolf's life in Richmond and around these years, 1940 and 1941?
Yeah, this is very true to her actual life. She was suicidal. She was a genius and a mess. And yes, her husband Leonard took her to live in the suburbs. They set up a printing press, and she did have a sister named Vanessa, who was a painter, and everyone thought that Vanessa was the great artist. We probably don't know the name Vanessa Bell anymore as one of the great artists of the 20th century, but that was the idea. Virginia was this sort of hysteric who wrote tinselly little experiments in prose, and Vanessa, with her children and the dogs and the house and the big, sexy life, was the rock star. That kiss, that vampire kiss that Nicole plants on Miranda Richardson, who plays Vanessa, as if to sort of suck the life out of her and into Virginia. Like I was saying, actors do these things. No one expected that. And Miranda was so freaked out by it, she wouldn't do the scene again. That was it. One take. But it was just right. But that was Nicole's idea. She didn't tell anybody. She just did it. Love that.
This was also a scene of protective love by Leonard, who's trying to protect her till the end of the argument, where she explains him that this protection is what is killing her. So, and this protective love is also throughout the book and throughout the film on many places, right?
I don't really talk about, I haven't ever really talked about this in public while my father was alive, and he is now no longer alive. My mother just left when I was 15, and my sister was 13. She was just gone. It's about the time I read Mrs. Dalloway, as a matter of fact, and she did leave a note. She said she needed to be away for a while, and she would call once a week. And After about a year, she came back. My father took her back in. Fine, Mom. Hey, honey, glad you're home. She'd been in Portland, Oregon, working in a library. And I was furious. I didn't speak to her for years. And then I did. She was my mother after all. And I began to understand that she had no choice. She had to get out of there. She was suffocating. She was so protected as to feel like she was dying. And this story was really meant for me as, I don't know how this will sound. I guess I'll have to say as a story about forgiveness that I was writing for my mother. Part of what I was trying to say with the original story, God knows I wasn't thinking it would be a movie, was that that was really hard for us. It was really hard for you. And if part of a novelist's job is to insist that everything is even more complicated than it looks, I think it's also part of a novelist's job to insist that no human act is unforgivable. There may not be a God in these people's lives, but there is the sense that there is no story we can't tell. There is no harm that can't be forgiven. Thank you.
Let's see the rest of the film.
Let's.
So I suppose there might be questions from the audience. So we will have some time to have them maybe before we hand over into the questions of the audience. These last words in the film are not in the book. These are not words of Virginia Woolf, as far as I know. So these are words of David Hare.
Yes. David was enormously reluctant about doing that, but then he did it. He wrote in the voice of Virginia Woolf, reluctantly, but he did it. Up until the end, though, that what you see in the beginning, when Nicole is writing the note, that is her actual suicide note. And I think one of the things that is so compelling to me about Virginia Woolf, she was, of course, a great writer, but, talking about forgiveness, her last act was to assure her husband, Leonard, that he was not to blame. That was the note she left on. And that has always seemed so stunning to me. To say, virtually from beyond the grave, you've done everything anyone possibly could. No two people could have been happier than we were. Right?
So any questions, please? There's a microphone.
I know it's a little somber.
Good evening. Thank you for having you here. I wonder, did you have any intention to co-work or work on a screenplay of the movie too, and why?
On this movie, no. There was never, I had never written a screenplay, and it seemed clearly like a job for someone who knew what they were doing. There was never any thought that I would write the screenplay. I wouldn't have wanted to. I was too close to it, for one thing. I not only had never written a screenplay before, I felt like I can't remake this story cinematically. Call in David Hare, fly him out from London. He should do it.
Yeah, just wait for the mic, please.
Hi, good evening. You said that your mom did get the chance to see some of the scenes from the movie, and it's obviously a difficult story of hers that you were telling. What was her reaction to seeing it told that way?
The book was difficult for her, more than, it was not quite the reaction I had expected from her. But yeah, oh, don't raise your children to be novelists. We just spill all the family secrets. But there was something about seeing a version of herself played by Julianne. Not so much that Julianne is a movie star, though she, of course, is, but the kind of nuance and sensitivity and emotion that Julianne brought to more or less my mother's story, she was very happy with. I was very glad about that. I mean, I hope someone will play me I hope some movies will play me someday. But I don't have much hope about that, really.
All right, so thank you for coming here. This has been a brilliant evening for me. I think that for everyone here as well. My question is, what was your thought process behind transforming Clarissa Dalloway from the book to your Clarissa, played by Meryl Streep here? Like, I mean, Richard dying of AIDS here, Clarissa actually ending up with Sally, etc.
Yeah.
How did you go about that?
Really by trial and error. For every novel of mine that gets published, there's about 2 novels worth of pages that are gone. It's the only way I know how to work. Just try it this way, try it that way. And I was really trying to work from Mrs. Dalloway, the novel, in which there is a shell-shocked World War I veteran who kills himself. And actually, in the next to last draft, I realized I had been too faithful to Mrs. Dalloway. That one of the great things about that novel is it feels a little improvisational. It feels almost like a jazz riff by a great jazz musician. And I thought, no, loosen it up a little. Loosen up, citizen. So in Mrs. Dalloway, the Woolf novel, she has one girlhood kiss with her best friend Sally. In my novel, she ends up with Sally. Okay? No disrespect to Virginia Woolf, but in my novel, she and Sally are together.
Hello, thank you for being here. How do you feel about the music in the film, the Phil Glass music?
Oh, I love the music. It was a little controversial. It's louder. It's at a higher volume than most music in most movies. They tried like 2 other musicians who did scores, and they tended both other musicians wrote sort of period music for each of the 3 periods, and finally they just went to Philip and said, we need something unifying. We need something that is not of a particular era. Philip, will you do it? And he did, and I thought, I loved the music.
Do we have more questions?
a long trip for the microphone.
Sorry, thank you.
No,
Hello.
of course.
I was wondering whether you ever intended Laura in particular to be kind of a representative of mental illness, of depression, if that ever like crossed your mind, if that was ever something you researched for her, or if that was just a story of, you know, a woman who's kind of unhappy, but not, you know, depressed or diagnosed.
You know, I think it can be a fine line. But yeah, I do think of her as depressive. Virginia Woolf was depressive. And one of the questions one asks about Virginia Woolf is if she were alive today and medicated for her depression, would she have written those books? We'll never know. But yeah, depression and medication feel like complicated questions to me. And more than anything, when the book came out and when the movie came out, I can't tell you how many women came up to me and said, I did that. I left my family. I've never seen a character who does that treated sympathetically before. And that mattered to me. But clearly, it is quite clear in the movie she got to a place where she just couldn't survive. Whether it's depression or just general unhappiness or a combination of the two. The point is she could not live where she was another minute.
Thank you.
How much of Virginia Woolf, how much of David Hare, and how much of yourself do you think is there in the character of played by Ed Harris?
Oh, Ed Harris. Well, I don't think much of myself is in the Ed Harris character. I mean, there was a little bit of yourself in every character. No, Richard is actually based on a writer I knew named Harold Broadkey, who we don't really read anymore. But Harold was brilliant, and he was somebody who invented you as he spoke to you. He insisted on a version of you who was more fabulous and tragic and mythic than you actually felt yourself to be. And for a while in Harold's presence, that was exhilarating, and then it began to be unbearable. And sooner or later, all of us who were the focus of that kind of grandiosity on his part had to leave him, and that is really who Richard is meant to be. Someone with a vision too big for people to bear. And you know, Ed lost 40 pounds for the part. He asked me what poet to read. I gave him some names of some poets. He worked very hard for this, clearly.
No more questions? There is one. So maybe the last one.
One more. Yeah, I don't want to keep everybody too late. It's.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My question is how much the topic, or maybe it's more of a taboo, when a mother leaves the child, which is very much shown in the last dialogue in between Meryl Streep and Julianne Moore. How much was that a topic for you in general?
Oh, very much. And if anything, when the book came out and then the movie, I was surprised at what a taboo it was, and I think still is. We really, really, really don't like it when a woman is an ambiguous mother. We really don't like that at all. It is one of the last taboos. Even now, this story, and this is really about women, is always, well, yeah, she blew up the building and killed 100 people, but she was a good mother. And what if she wasn't? What if she wasn't really meant to be a mother? What if she was a fallible mother? What if she left? What if she did bad things? Does that mean she's just on the trash heap? No. But yeah, it's still a big taboo, and a lot of people have a lot of trouble with it. Shall we say good night? It's a lovely night up. Everyone should get out. We should get out of this room right now and go out into the night. All right?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.